Okay, very good. Hello, everyone. My name is Marcio Katz. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Get Global International, and today we have the pleasure to be with Aaron Weller. How are you, Aaron?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Okay, that's good. Today we're going to talk about something very interesting. We feel that US is going to be the next big market for data privacy professionals. We've seen the same movement in Europe and in some other countries all around the world. And US, it seems to get the same to get into the same scenario that we've seen some other countries. But this is one of the things that we are going to talk about. I'm going to make here some questions. My role here is just to throw some topics, and but we are going to learn from Aaron. Aaron is a data privacy professional. For how long, Aaron, have you been working with data privacy?
So since around 2007, 2008, so about 15 years.
Okay. My first question is exactly this. We would like to know a little bit about you, a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I call data privacy my third career. So I started off doing audit work at one of the big four accounting firms. And I got interested around 1999 in information security. And I started working in that field. I ended up becoming a chief security officer for a couple of companies in California. And one of those companies actually had a privacy class action lawsuit that when I moved into that company, they were dealing with that. So I realized, because I owned privacy as well as security at the time, and I realized that I needed to know more about privacy. And the more that I started learning about it, the more interesting it was to me. And I ended up moving into privacy full time around 2011, 2012. And ever since then, I've been focused pretty much exclusively on privacy.
Okay, very good. And nowadays, what exactly do you do?
Sure. So I used to run the privacy consulting practice for PwC for the Western United States, and I about 4 years ago I left and started my own company. So I am a co-founder at Ethos Privacy. So we have a consulting practice. We also have a technology platform that helps people understand what are the rules that may apply to their organization. So it's been an interesting 3 or 4 years. I came through GDPR and have been working with CCPA. A lot of my clients are very large companies in the Fortune 500, but we also have clients who are smaller but dealing with some interesting privacy issues. So one of the things that I find most interesting about my job is just the range of different things and different problems that I get to see. So that keeps it interesting every day.
Yeah, and that's interesting because some people think that the big projects when it comes to data privacy comes from big companies, but sometimes a smaller company might have a very interesting data privacy project as well, because sometimes it doesn't depend on the size of the company, it's more the core business. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. I think some of our smaller clients, they're doing interesting things like if you're aware of, there are grocery stores where you can walk in, you can just pick things up and then walk out. And there's a lot of sensors in there and they know who you are and they charge your credit card. We've been talking to companies where they've got autonomous vehicle technology, or there's some really interesting issues around usage of drones. So we had a client that was a utility company that was using drones to see when to go and cut back the trees that were next to the power lines. So then some interesting privacy issues where they're flying over people's houses. So yeah, you just never know. There are, I think, privacy issues in a lot of different places, particularly where companies are working with these newer technologies where they may not necessarily even think about the privacy issues. And that can be some of the more interesting things that we deal with.
Yeah, definitely. I would like to know, I would appreciate if you could share your thoughts on the data privacy scenario in the US. How do you see this whole spectrum?
So for me, it's an exciting time to be a privacy professional. I probably would say that, given that that's what I do. But I think there's lots of opportunity. There's strong demand for people who know privacy, and as a result, there's great career prospects for people pretty much at every stage of their career. I feel that privacy has very much gone from being in the shadow of information security. If I look back 10 years, many organizations, even large ones, didn't really have people who were dedicated to privacy, or very few. And now, as the profession has grown and matured, we've really seen some more roles opening up. The expectation is that privacy is so complex now that not everyone needs to know everything about privacy, but you're getting some of these niche roles, which I think are interesting too. And from a US perspective, as you kind of alluded to earlier, there's a lot happening. There were 28 states introduced some kind of privacy legislation this year. So far, only Utah has been able to actually get the law passed this year. But with 28 states all working on it, the prediction I heard from Trevor Hughes, who's the CEO of the International Association of Privacy Professionals, was his ballpark was maybe 5 to 10 states this year that will pass some kind of privacy legislation, which if you're trying to deal with what do we need to do as an organization, you could see that that's definitely job security right there.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something, there is something very interesting that you said, that people sometimes don't understand exactly what data privacy is.
Mm-hmm.
They sometimes get confused, and they don't know the difference between data protection and data privacy, because they see more the protection of the data,
Mm-hmm.
the information security side of it. But data privacy is more the way that you're going to process the data, and not
Yeah.
only the way that you're going to protect the data itself. So very interesting.
Exactly. That's exactly the way that I describe it as well. Is that if you've got a data set and you need to secure it, you secure the data set, but you could still then run into privacy issues if you start using that for, let's say, I've got a list of people who say they don't want to receive marketing emails. If I start sending emails to those people, then I could get into trouble from a privacy perspective. And you could argue that maybe that was an access control issue, but often people have access to data sets for one reason, and they start turning around and using that data for another reason. So yeah, definitely every organization needs to work very closely between information security and privacy. But I think one of the things that it is a challenge is when security, people who have that security background, they don't realize some of the nuances around privacy, and they make some assumptions that turn out to cause problems.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. Previously, you mentioned the IAPP, and I know that you have attended the last IAPP Summit Data Privacy
Mhm.
event that they had. Um, how was it? I mean, what's your opinion? What did you guys talk about?
It was great. I mean, I was there in Washington D.C. last week, so it's very recent. And it's very strange in some ways to see everybody face to face again after 2 years of seeing each other over Zoom or over your video conferencing software of choice. And I heard as well that the attendance tripled in like the last 6 weeks before the conference, as I think people were realizing, oh, a lot of people that I know are going. And it was great to catch up with both some of my current clients, some of whom have been clients for a couple of years, and I've never met them in person. And even one of my team members who was there, who I hired 2 years ago, we'd never met in person until last week. So I'm glad that we're actually starting to meet in person again. I think from the content perspective, some of the keynotes were very interesting.
Mm,
I had, because we have this huge backlog of people I hadn't seen, I spent a lot of my time talking to people, kind of understanding what they're doing. I didn't actually, unfortunately, get to attend many of the sessions, but some of my team said that the sessions were very interesting as well. And of course, the networking and just getting back together and really spending that time when you're not talking about privacy, but really getting to build better relationships with people who are in the profession.
really
It
nice.
always surprises me that there's only maybe 2, 3 degrees of separation between people in the privacy industry. Everybody knows everybody else, and that is it's very easy to kind of make friends because you're like, oh, I know this person and they know that person, and so all of those things. it's a great experience. I couldn't do it every week. It's exhausting doing all of that work, but I think it was. I definitely look forward to the next conference.
That's good. I didn't go because I was just moving to the US. Now I'm living here in the US, so I wasn't able to attend this time, but maybe next year. And we don't know each other in person, so maybe next
Well,
year
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to be one of those who you would have the chance to meet in person. Um, what were the hot topics, I mean, technically wise, that were talked and addressed during the event?
Yeah, there were quite a few sessions around metrics and measuring privacy programs. I led a workshop on that topic. There's a lot, I think, of interest around the Schrems decision, the new Safe Harbor Privacy Shield, the new framework that's going to be put in place. And then also really a lot around the privacy technologies. So how do we select privacy technology? How do we get the best value out of that technology? What are some examples of people that are using technology to help drive their programs? So that there's a whole range of different things, but those were the ones that seemed to come up in a couple of different sessions.
Very interesting. And for those who are not a data privacy professional yet, but they are thinking about switching career, what do you think would be the best qualification, and what kind of course they should look for?
So I'm probably, well, I am a little bit biased because I teach the certifications for the IAPP, but I do think that in terms of kind of, it depends what you're looking for when it comes to certifications, because now there is not just one certification, but there are actually quite a few. So I think if you're just getting into privacy in the US and you're trying to get a good overview of some of the privacy laws, then the CIPP US gives a good overview of the laws. But it doesn't really tell you what to do about it. It'll tell you about what all of those different laws are. But then if you're looking for something that's going to tell you kind of what to do, there's another certification around being a privacy manager, setting up a program, the CIPM. If you're looking for something a little bit more technical, then either there is a certified information privacy technologist certification, which I'm on the review committee for that. So we just revamped a lot of the material about 2 years ago. And then ISACA also has a fairly new certification called the Certified Data Privacy Solutions Engineer,
Mhm.
which then looks at some of the areas around privacy governance and privacy architecture as well. So, as I mentioned earlier, because privacy is becoming a maturing field, we're getting more and more specialization. So,
Yeah.
when people say to me, "What is the right certification for me?" I usually ask, "Well, what is your job? What is your job now, and what do you want your next job to
Mhm.
be?" And then think about doing something that's going to help you grow in those particular things that will be most useful to you.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. And for those who already are data privacy professionals and are looking for, an update, to get to know a little bit more about something else, what do you think would be the best things that they should be looking for?
I think there's a lot of resources out there. I'm almost overwhelmed by the number of privacy stories. I do follow. There are some subreddits. If you use Reddit that are dedicated to privacy, they have a lot of the news. Of course, the professional associations will have regular newsletters, and a lot of the law firms and consulting firms will also have regular updates around some of the things that are going on that maybe a new fine has come out or a regulator's come out with some new guidance. So there's a lot going on. I think, if anything, the challenge is how to filter a lot of that information into the things that are. I see a lot of things that are interesting to me, but not necessarily relevant. So
Mhm.
it's for me, it's a lot of that balancing of. I usually skim the headlines and then save things to read later if they look like they might be interesting.
Mhm.
But yeah, there are a lot of resources out there that will tell you what's going on and kind of what are the new things to be looking for.
Interesting. Yeah, usually I say that there is, as you said, first a data privacy professional need to understand the rules. So you got to know a little bit about the data privacy regulation.
Mhm.
This is one side of the problem. But once you know at least how the regulation works, then you need to know what kind of tools you have to manage the problem itself, which is a totally different thing, and not so legal, more management. And there is also the technical aspect of it. When it comes to data protection, information security, ISO 27701, and those things. So I think these three things basically are the ones that we need to keep our eyes on every time. So once there is a new data privacy law, we need to understand how it works, because it's a new regulation, and then get to know what tools I'm gonna use to manage these new regulation, and that's pretty much how it works. With all these data privacy state laws coming up, do you feel that's a challenge for a data privacy professional in the US to keep updated with all those regulations?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, but we've seen similar things before. I mean, that we unfortunately still have a different data breach law in every single state in the
True.
US, and that's been the situation for a number of years. And I do worry. Well, it is job security for privacy professionals, but I do worry as well that we will end up with a similar situation in the US where we do have all of these state level laws. And it's interesting. I mean, one of the things that my team does is to look at these and try and work out where are they similar and where are they different. And a lot of the laws, they do have these little nuances, which, as you said, you've got to understand not only what does the law say, but then translate that into how are our policies going to change? What new technical considerations do we need to put in place? Even with things like the "Do Not Sell" button in CCPA, where I can go to the website and I can put a button on the website that says "Do Not Sell." That's easy, right? I need to talk to the web design team and they can get that done next week. But what happens when you press the button, right? And I think that's a lot of the, that translation. It's that really important piece between not just understanding what the requirements are, but being able to translate that into how do we go and do this? How do we know what a sale is? How do we keep that list up to date? How do we know that when we press the button, something is going to happen? And then what happens when another state comes out with a law that says, well, sale now means something different. Oh, and by the way, now you get a do not share button and a do not sell button, right? So there's a lot of these things where it is a challenge to keep up to date with these things, particularly where a lot of it sounds the same. And when you're trying to explain it, and people who aren't dealing with this day to day, they're like, well, that's not a sale, that's a cookie. I think some of the jargon as well, the lawmakers aren't helping us to be able to implement some of these controls when they use different words for the same thing or they use different meanings. It does become pretty complicated. So holding all of those things together and then understanding how that applies to your specific company, it can be a real challenge.
I think that's the biggest challenge, because understanding the law itself, that's not too complicated most of the time. But trying to figure out what you need to do in order to comply with that law, that's something different, because each company does things, the same things, but differently. And the people sometimes they forget that a software or an application is just an automatic way of processing something. So there is a process behind that. But who is going to draw the process? And then when it's a data privacy process, it need to be analyzed by a consultant who will say, after you press the button, what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the big shifts over the last few years has really been that we've gone from kind of pre-GDPR, where you could say, okay, I need to understand what we're doing with the information at a level where I can write a privacy policy, a privacy notice, privacy statement, whatever word you want to use for it. But now when someone says, hey, give me every piece of information you have about me that's linked to me, right? You can't operate at this very high level anymore. You've got to get down, as you said, to each system, to each data. Why do you have my address from 10 years ago in this system and this address over here? And so I think a lot of that, these data subject rights have really driven that need for going into a lot more detail around what information do we have and how are we using it. which has led to, right, often that's not a skill set that a lawyer has. So we've had this expanded need for people who can go in, configure those systems, tie things together, and really be able to respond to a lot of those requests, which they're popping up in all of these state laws now, as well as GDPR and some other laws internationally.
Okay. I'm going to make a simple question, but maybe people who are not data privacy professional yet, they might have this question. Do I need to be a lawyer to be a data privacy professional?
So I'm not a lawyer, and about half of my team, about 30 people, are lawyers, and half of them aren't. So I think a lot of it, and sometimes I have people who have strange combinations, like a lawyer who was also a software developer. So that I think there are good roles for people both who are lawyers and then people who've got some of these other skills. I have project managers on my team who, as these projects get more and more complicated, we had a client that when they were rolling out some of those data subject rights, they had to make sure it was implemented properly over 1,000 systems. So that becomes a project management exercise, right? You don't necessarily need to know a lot about privacy to manage that project. So I think there are a lot of roles where I think of adjacencies. So anyone with kind of a risk background or a security background, you're going to have some of those transferable skills, project managers. So yeah, you definitely don't have to be a lawyer. But conversely, I would say if you don't have any lawyers in your privacy team, you're probably asking for trouble.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm a lawyer myself. I'm a European and Brazilian lawyer. Actually, I got my green card on extraordinary abilities because of my career in data privacy. But I always ask these questions because I agree with you. You definitely don't need to be a lawyer to be a very good data privacy professional, but definitely you need to understand the regulation, or at least have a very good data privacy lawyer in your team,
Yep.
because there will be some legal issues that will have to be handled. But I usually say that the problems are not solved most of the times by the lawyers when it
Mhm.
comes to trying to implement a data privacy program itself.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. Um, so if you don't need to be a lawyer, what kind of background this professional should have? Or I mean,
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily one background.
mm,
I work with people from all different kinds of backgrounds, but I think those skills around kind of uh, being okay with the ambiguity, like the rules could change next week and we need to adapt to that. I think also one of the other things we haven't really talked about being a privacy professional is that you need to be able to engage with pretty much the entire organization. Almost everybody uses personal information.
soft
So
skill is
exactly,
mandatory.
exactly. Yeah, you have to be well liked by people. You have to be able to influence people. You have to be able to connect with them and get them to do the things that you
Yeah,
want them to do. And those kind of skills, they can be very hard to teach as well. I've always said that I can teach you privacy, but I can't teach you how to be a likable person. So I think some of those other skills as well that I've had good success in the past with people who are working on the IT help desk. They're very used to that customer service mentality. They
mhm.
understand technology. You can teach them privacy on top of that. So I think I wouldn't almost any background, we can make you into a privacy professional. But I think, yeah, it's definitely that curiosity,
Mhm.
the wanting to be working on new things, and not just looking at the same areas. And those soft skills, as you said, are so important.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you, definitely. Do you think that's a good opportunity for the young people, young professionals? Should they be looking for this a new career in the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I'm most proud of is when I can bring somebody in at the start of their career and train them up, and then they at some point they'll move on to a great opportunity, or they'll really kind of grow as a professional. It's very personally satisfying for me. I do think there are very few entry level jobs in privacy. Most job descriptions you'll see will be looking for 3 to 5 years experience. And I think people are often put off by saying, well, how do I get the experience without being in that role? But I think that's where kind of if you can get in as a project manager, as somebody else who's going to be interacting with that information, a lot of organizations, particularly larger organizations, have networks of what they would call privacy champions, or kind of people who are working in the organization, so in the marketing team or customer service. And what we've found is that if you find people who are enthusiastic who are in those other teams, you can sometimes grow them into privacy professionals where that becomes their whole job. So I think there are opportunities, maybe not the obvious, I'm going to apply directly for a job. But I think with getting into working with personal information, there's a lot of opportunities to get in. But people need to be a little bit creative sometimes when you're just starting out as to, if this is my goal, maybe it's my second or third step rather than being the one straight out of the beginning of the career.
Okay. And do you think that the US organizations are really working on trying to get compliant with the data privacy legislation, or they are waiting to see what's going to happen?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a perception, particularly from Europeans, and as both you and I are or were at one point, that the US doesn't really care about privacy laws. I think that's not my experience at all. I work with a lot of organizations that have a lot of people, a lot of resources dedicated to privacy. I've talked to CEOs of very big companies where they're like, yep, we absolutely have to follow the law. We have to do these things. And if anyone tells you that they can't do it, then tell them to come and talk to me. So I think there really is a lot of that. Not every company, but I think there is a lot of that understanding at the executive level. And I don't know if you saw there was an announcement from, I think it was the SEC a couple of weeks ago, that there are going to be now new cybersecurity requirements for boards around experience and privacy. I see as always being a few years behind cybersecurity. But I think that's probably the direction that we're moving as well, is that this has to be a board level issue. And yeah, a lot of companies are taking it very seriously. They're frustrated by the fragmentation, and they're frustrated that they spend a lot of time trying to work out what they should be doing rather than doing the things. And I think that's been some of the more interesting things I've done in the last couple of years, is actually getting the chance to talk to lawmakers as they're proposing and drafting these bills, and to be able to comment on some of them and say, this looks good, but it's going to be really hard to actually do. And honestly, it probably doesn't help that much. We should be doing more of these things over here instead. So yeah, I think there's a lot of us that are really trying to, we want to do the right thing, but it's really hard when every single, and that's the reason fundamentally for GDPR, if you remember, right? It was to try and harmonize all of the data protective directives where every had gone and done it differently. I think that's what we're unfortunately probably going to end up with in the US. And then there will be immense pressure to harmonize just because of the level of effort on little details rather than the big protections that people are really looking for.
I think so as well. Yeah, and the scenario that you have described, it's not so different than we've seen in Europe or in some other countries. First, it starts with the big companies because, they are public companies, organizations, so they need to comply with the law. And the other companies, they just follow the big ones, mostly because they are vendors. So the big companies gonna, demand them to comply with the law, or they're not going to do business anymore. So it's in most of the countries what we've seen, it's not so much about the regulation and the fines and so on, but it's more a question of being able to keep my client, my big client, because they are demanding so that I comply with the law. So it's pretty much what the same thing that we've seen in some other parts of the world, right?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think that you shouldn't underestimate, or nobody should underestimate, the push through the contracts that the laws kind of get passed down. That really is a very big piece of it as well. And we've seen this with things like environmental requirements as well, right? Where a big company will
Mhm.
say, you have to recycle, you have to use sustainable materials, and then they pass that through their supply chain. So I think similarly with the data supply chains we're dealing with, it's the same kind of effect.
Yeah, yeah. So, what are the next steps in the US when it comes to data privacy regulation from
Well,
your
I think we're
perspective?
going to, yeah, I mean, I think we're still going to see more action at the state level. There is, from what I hear, there's bipartisan agreement in principle on a federal privacy law. I think the trouble is that as always, the details are where people get stuck. So I think but there will be more. So it's interesting because both from a business lobby perspective, the businesses want consistency. They don't want new laws every 3 months. They want one set of things to deal with. And then also from the individuals and the advocates' perspective, where they want people to have privacy rights. They want people to be able to know what they're doing and for it not to be dependent on where they live as to what rights they get. So I think you've got pressure coming effectively from both sides of the aisle. But it's really coming down to, and some of the sticky issues are around how do we, if a federal law comes in, will it preempt or will it supersede the state laws? And some of the states, like California, that have put in pretty strict laws, they say, well, we don't want our law being watered down by a federal law. So that's a tricky issue because if the federal law doesn't preempt state laws, then all you've done is you've added one more law that you've got to comply with, right? Because all of the others as well. Another issue that's really been challenging is around what happens if there's a violation.
Hmm.
Does the state attorney general get the right to sue the company? Is there a period of cure? Oh, I made a mistake. Let me fix it. Or can individuals go and sue organizations directly? And that's been one of the big tricky issues where I can see it from both sides as well, where there could be a lot of effectively nuisance lawsuits. People often don't understand the nuances of some of the laws. I call them kind of their, lawyers from the law school of Google, that they'll go and read something and they'll get part of part of it right and part of it wrong, and then make a complaint. But I think people do need to have a right to, when someone is clearly violating or a company is clearly violating the law, um, there has to be some kind of a recourse. But that's where one of the big arguments is about what's the best way of doing that that kind of balances some of these competing interests.
Okay. Okay. Just one last question. Do you think that the FTC is doing a good job when it comes to data privacy?
The FTC has certainly been active, and I think they continue. One of the speakers at the IAPP conference was actually one of the new FTC commissioners who laid out an agenda for continuing to invest in data privacy, and certainly they have brought on people who are much more technical. I think they've got
Mhm.
much more resource to be able to understand some of these really complex issues, particularly when it comes to how technology uses personal information, where they are very complicated. So the FTC can only do so much, right? That their remit is very broad around consumer protection, and I think that's one of the questions as we look going forwards is should the FTC continue to be kind of that main privacy regulator, or should we, as
Mhm.
California is now doing, setting up their own privacy regulator as
Mhm.
opposed to relying on the state attorney general, who, like the FTC, has a lot of other jobs to
Okay. I said it would be the last question, but
do.
there is one more. How do you think it should be? I mean, should there be should there be one specific governmental organization to take care of it, or the FTC would be the one
It
responsible for it?
It's a really hard question because that's not how things are set up at the moment. One of the things, if you look at who regulates privacy in the United States, you've got the Department of Commerce who are involved in Privacy Shield. You've got HHS who looks after HIPAA. You've got all of these different regulators, and that's just at the federal level, let alone at the
Mhm.
state level as well. So to try and piece all those things together, I mean, in an ideal world, if I could say in an ideal world, yeah, having one regulator that's really dedicated, they really understand privacy in detail. They've got that power to look after these things. But I think that would only work if there was effectively a GDPR equivalent where we don't have all of these sectoral variations, right? We don't have different rules for healthcare and financial services, and because otherwise it's you look at a lot of the state laws, they carve out HIPAA and they carve out FICRA and they carve out all of these other laws that are already regulated by other entities. So there's a lot, just like when we went through the the financial reforms after the 2008 recession, and they pulled together a lot of the financial services regulator into their CMPB. You could do that, but it's a lot of work. So I don't know that the appetite is there right now to really fundamentally reform a lot of those things where, for the most part, they've been refined, they're working. So I think that would be a very major undertaking. So maybe in 20 years, but I think for the moment we're going to be stuck with kind of this patchwork of regulators just because of the way that the laws have evolved.
I see. I see. I don't think the U.S. in the future will have this. Will follow the same GDPR standard. I mean, I don't see that. So, but we'll see. We'll see. But I definitely agree with you that data privacy is becoming a hot topic in the U.S. A great opportunity for young professionals and even the ones who just want to switch career. So definitely, it's great talking with you. You know, every time that we get together, I have the opportunity to learn a little bit more. So thank you very much for spending, you know, almost 1 hour with us. And feel free for, you know, your last words here today.
Always a pleasure, and I hope to actually the next conference we will actually meet in person.
Definitely, it's going to be a pleasure. So thank you very much, my friend, and have a great night.
Sounds great. Same to you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.